My friends, the new Star Wars series Skeleton Crew reaches its 4th episode, marking the mid-season. Things are getting a bit serious and a bit dark. In this video, we'll talk about what this chapter means for the series, how the characters developed, and list references as varied as Terminator 2,
I have to go away.
No, don't do it.
Ivan's childhood, as well as Everything Everywhere All at Once.
What's happening?
This last one is due to the fact that the Daniels directed this episode, Daniel Kwan and Daniel Scheinert, renowned for the aforementioned and groundbreaking multiversal film. I think they were the perfect choice for this episode titled Can't Say I Remember Noah Attin. The director's ability was more than proven. Here, they combine visual chaos with agile storytelling and the development of complex characters with contradictory emotions, as well as more clues about who on earth Jod Na Nawood really is. I'm creating 2 versions of this video, one in Spanish and one in English. I want to share my passion for Star Wars and this incredible series with a broader audience. I want to thank you for being here, for taking the time and choosing this video among the possibly hundreds of options you have for Star Wars content. I want you to know that I pour a lot of effort, dedication and heart into every analysis to make it special. If you're watching the English version, I'm likely using an artificial intelligence tool to translate it. Please be kind. I am doing everything I can to make this as professional as possible. Thank you for your patience. Here's your spoiler warning.
What is that?
Episode breakdown. In this chapter, the Skeleton Crew arrives at a world they thought was their home, but it isn't. This place is nothing more than a post-apocalyptic reflection, grey and full of ash. It is the planet at Aishran, a war-torn world where a conflict unfolds between 2 tribes. The Droid guerrilla fighters made up of lost children with a few adult leaders, and the Attin, a mercenary army seeking control. This scenario strongly resembles generational and territorial struggles within the Star Wars universe, but it also adds a layer of complexity where children are the primary agents of resistance. The parallel between the world of Attin, where these children come from, and this world of Aishran reinforces the idea of the dual worlds of the Old Republic. In this chapter, 4 more worlds are mentioned as part of the legendary 9 hidden planets at I2, at Arabin, at Arisia, and at Akoda. I believe this hints at a shared legacy, probably tied to secrets forgotten by both the Sith and the Jedi, which now all factions present in this series will fight to claim. In this episode of Skeleton Crew, Fern reaffirms her ingenuity and skill in manipulating droids, something she had already shown in the earlier episodes, as she avoids the supervision of her mother, Farah, a leader from Attin. On the other hand, we see a significant change in the group dynamic when Wim, who had been the most confident and impulsive character until now, starts to recognize Fern's natural leadership. This interaction reinforces a recurring theme in Star Wars. Leadership does not always come from brute strength or imposed authority, but rather from intelligence, courage, and mutual trust. We also get key character details such as Neel, who is quickly becoming one of my favorites, along with KB and SM33. I think the cherry on top of this chapter is the dynamic between Jod and SM33, who are revealing more layers of complexity and their respective tangled past. Now moving on to the Easter egg hunt and references. In this chapter, SM33 takes center stage during a pivotal moment and the climax of the episode when his memory overlaps and he begins attacking under the orders of his former captain. This internal conflict of the droid, of course, reminds us of everything related to the Terminator universe, particularly Terminator 2, Judgment Day, where the T-800 fights against his original programming to protect John Connor. Additionally, SM33's behavior at one point reminded me of a specific line from Biff Tannen in Back to the Future Part 2.
He said someday a crazy, wild-eyed scientist or a kid may show up asking about that book. And if that ever happens...
And then he told me, if anyone ever comes poking around looking for the treasure, he's told to pull them apart.
Of course, this also connects to one of my favorite movies, I, Robot. Within the Star Wars universe, we have those droids from Rebels who infiltrate the planet Atollon, where the nascent rebellion takes refuge. These droids resemble Ralph McQuarrie's original sketches for C-3PO, which were in turn inspired by the iconic Maria from Metropolis. These little machines behave in a way similar to how SM-33 is portrayed in this chapter. Returning to the opening moments of the episode, Wim mentions the possibility that they had been asleep for 100 years. This evokes a foundational concept of the science fiction genre, cryogenic sleep. This device is used to explore the effects of time and disconnection from the past, and within the internal logic of these stories allows characters to travel great distances. Of course, an iconic example of this can be found in the original 1968 film Planet of the Apes, as well as in its numerous sequels and remakes, some better than others, where astronauts wake up in a distant future after a prolonged space journey in hibernation. Their disorientation in the face of a completely changed civilization resonates with all the implications of Wim's comment. Another important reference is 2001, A Space Odyssey, also from 1968, where cryogenics allows the crew to travel long distances, as we've mentioned, preserving their lives at the cost of emotional and temporal disconnection. There's also that pretty strange movie from a few Christmases ago with Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence, which I think is called Passengers or something like that. In this chapter of Skeleton Crew, there's a subtle but fun note that reminded me of Pirates of the Caribbean. Dead Man's Chest, especially the classic narrative trick of introducing an adversary who is initially camouflaged, slightly out of focus in the background, only to be dramatically revealed later. Knowing that this time we're dealing with children makes it all the more unsettling.
More of them.
You are a Jedi, right?
I never actually said that.
Right here, without going any further, there's a scene that seems to pay homage to the Lord of the Rings, specifically the moment when Frodo and Sam hide among the rubble and stones to avoid being spotted at the Black Gate by the soldiers of the Southern Army. This entire theme of the lost children, of course, brings us back to the classic work of James M. Barrie, Peter Pan. I personally think of the movie Hook. These children from the planet at Attin, who call themselves the Droid tribe, face an uncertain future in the middle of a conflict far greater than themselves. Within the Star Wars universe, this concept connects with stories like those from the world of Kenari, present in the flashbacks of the series Andor, where we see Cassian, then known as Kassa, and his sister surviving in a devastated world without adult guidance. There's also a comic arc called Yoda's Secret War, issues 26 to 30 of the 2015 Star Wars series, where, through the stories in the diary of Obi-Wan Kenobi, Luke learns that Yoda visited a planet engaged in an endless war, which also involved child guerrillas. Unlike all these stories we've mentioned, the children in Skeleton Crew do have adult leaders, but they seem to be exploited by the malice of those same adults. There's a more complex and somber nuance in this dynamic. I think one of the most notable aspects of this episode is everything related to the Supervisor's Tower, which introduces a concept of control and centralization that resonates with the signature Star Wars theme, the weak fighting against an authoritarian regime. An immediate connection, although perhaps not the most popular, lies with the series Star Wars Resistance, where Captain Dosa operates from a tower that symbolizes not only authority but also a strategic place for decision-making and the protection of the station's inhabitants, the Colossus. While I know Resistance is considered one of the weaker series in the franchise, I think this theme of leadership as a central conflict is quite common here in Skeleton Crew. Beyond Star Wars, I'll repeat the references I've mentioned in previous videos. For example, the symbol of oversight in the movie The Giver, where a centralized authority figure controls the flow of information and even the emotions of the inhabitants. There's also the man in the high castle, where the tower or castle simultaneously acts as a beacon of resistance but also control, depending on the perspective. Another interesting parallel in a more recent series is Westworld, where the control tower plays a fundamental role not just in managing the park and its inhabitants, but later in shaping the dystopian future. Absolute power and manipulation of events define this environment. I think that within this series, the visual design strongly resembles the command bridges in Imperial ships, especially Star Destroyers. These structures represent not only power, but also the ability to operate large-scale conflicts from a distance. When discussing other universes, I think there is a strong thematic resonance with 1984 by George Orwell and its Ministry of Truth, something that was also pioneeringly depicted a long time ago in George Lucas's debut film THX 1138. In the context of Skeleton Crew, the concept of the Supervisor's Tower is a narrative axis that symbolizes the imbalance of power and raises key questions: who controls the information, who controls the truth, and how does this affect the characters trapped in this system? Additionally, there seem to be important clues here about the locations of those 9 planetary jewels of the Old Republic. Now, moving into some speculation on my part, at the beginning of the episode, there are structures that strongly remind me of the destructive satellites from Operation Cinder. This raises many questions. Of course, we are talking about those satellites introduced in the story of Battlefront 2 and also briefly mentioned in The Mandalorian. Designed by the Empire to execute the contingency plan following Emperor Palpatine's death, they were intended to destroy key planets and destabilize the galaxy's order. If this turns out to be true, Skeleton Crew could be planting seeds to explore everything related to the Imperial remnants we saw in the Ahsoka series, as well as in The Mandalorian Season 3, and the failed experiments tied to Palpatine's cloning, the creation of the First Order, and the future army of the Final Order seen in The Rise of Skywalker. This world of Attin presents a destroyed version of Attin, and of course seeing an RX droid in this post-apocalyptic world along with that Star Tours transport strongly recalls the opening of Judgment Day. We are introduced to an important character with many references, Hyena, played by Hala Finley, who also appeared in Venom, Let There Be Carnage and Paradise Highway. Her character bears several similarities to Alpha 1, the leader of the Canary tribe in Andor that we mentioned earlier, portrayed by Malini Raman Middleton. Alpha 1 is a central figure in the flashbacks of Cassian's childhood on Canary. Now, moving on to the creatures in this universe, we have a variety of EOPs, quadruped and herbivorous animals that we've already seen as native to Tatooine, resembling camels. They appeared in Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, as well as Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, and in the series Obi-Wan Kenobi, where they serve as mounts for Obi-Wan. Here, they have horns, which could indicate a subspecies adapted to different planetary environments. In this 4th episode, we see the antagonist, the Attin, wearing helmets that strongly resemble the one used by General Veers in The Empire Strikes Back. This design also appeared in the movie Solo and is part of Ezra Bridger's collection in Star Wars Rebels. Moving on to the deep analysis and my theories about this episode and the series overall, the character Neel stands out as a figure that evokes several iconic characters from literature and cinema. His tenderness, integrity, and bravery are reminiscent of Neville Longbottom in the Harry Potter series, Samwell Tarly from Game of Thrones, and the greatest of them all, Samwise Gamgee from The Lord of the Rings. I believe Neel, in his own way, is on the path to becoming a character of that stature. It also reminded me of a scene from Aladdin, the 1992 animated version, when he shares his food with children who have nothing to eat. It's a reminder that true strength doesn't always lie in aggression, but in heart, compassion, and empathy. I want to be honest, in the conversation between Hyena and Neel, at times I felt there was a somewhat complex undertone. After all, Neel is still a child who comes from very favorable conditions. I don't want to use the word, but let's say privilege, advising kindness to a girl who has lived on a planet in perpetual war. This could come across as somewhat gratuitous advice. However, Neel has already gone through the process of confronting an adult world, dealing with adversity, and, despite being afraid, mastering the courage to face situations. Because of that, I think the dynamic between these two characters makes a lot of sense and works well. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Now we turn to Jod Na Nawood, who shows an ambiguous nature. First, he steals all the children's belongings, or at least ramages through them, and allegedly uses Wim's dietaries for his future deal with the Attin. However, while sorting through their things, we get another holographic glimpse of that reinterpretation from earlier episodes of the Star Wars Holiday Special from 1978, featuring the circus-like dance scene. I think the names of the planets can point to many interesting connections. So far we know 6. At Attin, at Aitu, at Aravin, at Arisia, at Akoda, and this one introduced in this episode called at Aichran. These names seem rich in meaning and invite us to theorize about possible cultural and historical parallels. Of course, there are obvious connections to the 9 Greek muses or the 7 wonders of the ancient world, but I believe there's something even subtler. This could be lost jewels from a bygone past, akin to Atlantis. Speaking of worlds in the Star Wars universe, there's an echo of planets like Duin, Tatooine, Onderon, Batuu, Yavin, or Felucia. based on the sound of their names. These planets are pivotal in various moments of the saga, which might suggest that the jewels of the Old Republic, as mentioned in previous videos, have a significant role in this narrative, as they are not just relics of treasure but also of knowledge tied to the galaxy's legacy. I believe this series of planets is controlled by an artificial entity. I'm unsure whether the devastation of Attin was due to a failure of that technology or simply the neglect these worlds experienced after the fall of the Old Republic. There's a clear connection to the autopilot in the movie WALL-E, which itself ties back to the original reference of HAL 9000 in 2001, Space Odyssey. Either way, it all points to a galactic network of lost knowledge, something we've seen before in series like Clone Wars or Rebels, and even in The Mandalorian, with its focus on temples and Jedi ruins. Additionally, in this episode, we see that Hyna's father, General Strix, wears a symbol on his chest that seems to reference the configuration of the 9 planets shown on the scroll presented by the Oracle Kim. Now here's the part I find the most interesting. Everything related to what I believe is the origin of Jod Na Nawood, the character played by Jude Law. With his many aliases like Crimson Jack or Captain Silvo, he reminds us of iconic characters like Jack Sparrow, Han Solo, Hondo Ohnaka, and others. If we piece together everything we've learned so far in this mid-season, I think the choice not to explicitly show the scene where Jod Na Nawood negotiates with the Attin for the EOPs was intentional. How exactly did he manage to free Fern, Wim, Neel, and KB from the Droid clan? I don't believe it was solely due to his skills as a negotiator or his reputation as a thief with some sense of honor. I suspect he may have even used the Force to manipulate the situation or violently defeat the warriors and keep the money for himself. At this point, it's clear he doesn't identify as a Jedi. His lack of loyalty to the principles of the Order is evident. Another key point is his distrust of droids, which sets him apart from characters like Luke, Anakin Skywalker, or even Hera Syndulla. Instead, it aligns him with figures like the Mandalorian and others who carry a darker legacy. Because there's an unspoken rule in Star Wars, those who are cruel to droids tend to be morally flawed. In contrast, those who value droids as the incredible tools they are and as beings worthy of respect are often intrinsically good characters. I've read valuable opinions in the channel's comments suggesting that Jod Na Nawood might have been a Padawan who survived the Clone Wars, a learner who lost his way, or perhaps someone with a Jedi Master who abandoned or left him behind, possibly during a crisis. However, there's one specific phrase he says: "Droids can disappoint you." This makes me feel he's connected to the Separatists. Let's remember that the Separatists were the group that fought against the Republic, relying heavily on droid armies, which hypothetically led to their downfall, although in reality I believe both sides lost in favor of Palpatine and the rise of the Empire. Still, this phrase sounds like that of a former separatist lamenting how the droids betrayed or disappointed him. He also mentions that his world smells like ash, much like at Attin, which opens up new theories about his origin. Some speculate he might be from Mustafar, the iconic volcanic world ravaged by war and home to Darth Vader. However, it could also point to newer planets like Kobo, seen in Jedi, Survivor, or Corvus, featured in the second season of The Mandalorian in the episode where Ahsoka Tano live-action version is introduced. I have a feeling his background might be tied to a past as a slave, possibly under the now extinct Zygerian Empire. Historically, pirates often liberated slaves from slave ships they encountered, many of whom would join their crews. I think this dynamic might apply here. His resentment toward the galactic system could stem from such an experience, perhaps as a slave in the Kessel mines. The idea that Jod was abandoned and forced to survive fits perfectly with his life as a pirate. Having not completed his training as a Force-sensitive individual, this would explain his relationship with the Force, which feels more instinctive than disciplined. It also explains his ability to manipulate situations and stay one step ahead, all without adhering to Jedi values. The fact that he hasn't yet wielded a lightsaber suggests he leans more toward the dark side, choosing to remain hidden rather than revealing himself as a beacon of hope. In this context, I believe Jod represents a fascinating archetype within the Star Wars universe, a Force user who doesn't fully align with either light or dark. While I think he's closer to the latter, he operates with selfish moral ambiguity forged by adversity and a life on the fringes of the galactic system. Conclusions. This episode reaffirms that Skeleton Crew is much more than just an entertainment series. Like the previous episodes, it immerses us in a narrative full of emotional and visual layers that explore the harshness of war through a child's perspective. This creates a deeply heartbreaking and reflective view as it connects with real-world conflicts we face today. Moreover, I believe this series is serving as a true intergenerational bridge, something the sequel trilogy aimed for but failed at spectacularly. Skeleton Crew is successfully bringing together newer fans, middle generation fans, and the original fans who, with all due respect, may no longer be so young. This series is reaching a level of sophistication that, proportionally speaking, reminds me of what Andor achieved, tackling complex themes in a fresh way while maintaining that unmistakable Star Wars essence. It definitely deserves to be analyzed and, of course, enjoyed. What do you think about Jod Na Nawood and his mysterious past? What are your theories about the 9 jewels of the Old Republic? Don't miss the analysis we've already done for the first 3 episodes, available in 2 videos. I'll also be making these videos in English, so if you're watching this translated version, thank you. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and if you're interested, subscribe to the channel. I'm Danny Divagues, and I'll see you soon.